Welcome to the Beyond Sunday podcast, where we bring Sunday home. Join us as we dive deeper into First Baptist's weekly sermons, discuss practical applications, and answer your questions. Hi, I'm Jordan Upton, co-host of the Beyond Sunday podcast. With God's help, my wife will have given birth to a sweet and healthy baby boy by the time you hear this episode. Pastor Jeff and I are taking a few weeks off from the podcast, but we wanted to have some short content to share in the interim. Over the years, Pastor Jeff has mentioned multiple times that it would be good to talk about Sabbath Rest, so that seems like the perfect subject for such a time as this. Some of you know this already, but I'm a Sabbatarian. I honor the seventh day, Saturday, as a Sabbath. From Friday evening to Saturday evening, my family rests from work. On Saturday mornings, my family goes to a Messianic Jewish congregation where we worship and study with fellow Sabbatarian disciples of Jesus. Now, you may have a couple questions right off the bat. Why is Jordan talking about Sabbatarianism on a Baptist podcast? Isn't resting on Saturday an Old Testament thing? Don't Baptists worship on Sunday? These are great questions. Rest assured, I'm not here to tell you you're sinning by not being Sabbatarian. You're not sinning. Nor am I criticizing worship on Sunday. As you know, my family attends First Baptist on the Lord's Day, that is, on Sunday. Worshiping on the day after the Sabbath goes back to New Testament times, not as a replacement of the Sabbath, but as a celebration of the resurrection among believers. Think of this episode more like a TED Talk. I'm here to inspire you with the message of Shabbat Shalom, Sabbath peace. Let's start by defining the Sabbath. If you flip to the first chapter of Genesis, it details God's creation of the world in 6 days. The culmination is the creation of humanity, Adam and Eve. But then something unexpected happens. Genesis 2:2-3 says, "On the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation." Let's unpack that a little bit. The transcendent, untiring Creator made human beings and then rested. Why did he rest? Did God get tired? Not exactly. The word for rested here is something like ceased. God stopped creating for a day, and in doing so, he blessed the seventh day and made it holy. Later in Exodus 31:17, God retells the story and adds an incentive. In 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. Clearly, God is communicating that he wants humans to rest. Even without the narrative in Genesis, we can intuit that we were not made to work every single day. When we don't have adequate rest, our creativity, energy, and work quality all suffer. Paul told us to be imitators of God, so if God rested, we imitate our Creator when we rest. To be sure, we're also called to be faithful workers, but both our work and our rest should glorify God. All too easily, our jobs, schedules, and goals can become our gods. These gods are cruel taskmasters, and the rewards they offer for our overwork are vapor and vanity. Success, wealth, and fame are gods that demand our bodies and then steal our souls. However, when we are set free from the slavery of materialism and then trust God for provision, we find his peace that passes understanding. Sabbath peace, Shabbat Shalom, does not make sense in this world because it's not of this world. It's of God. It was there in the beginning, and it's a piece of Eden that's still available to us. Now, this is all fine in concept. Maybe it's even compelling. But you might ask, Jordan, isn't the Sabbath a Jewish thing? What about the Sabbath laws? Is Sabbath rest even kosher for Christians? Now, those are good questions. We'll save the teachings of Jesus about the Sabbath for another episode, but suffices to say that the New Testament doesn't forbid Gentile Christians from working on the Sabbath. Similarly, the Torah is clear that the Sabbath laws applied to the Israelites, but not to the Gentile nations around them. Unless they were servants of Jews or living in the land of Israel, Gentiles have never been obligated to observe Sabbath law. We may not be obligated to rest on the Sabbath, but there's another biblical reason for why Gentile Christians might consider the Sabbath: the Ten Commandments. Did you know that the Ten Commandments are listed twice in the Bible, but the commandment about the Sabbath is different each time. Exodus 31 says to remember the Sabbath, but Deuteronomy 5 says to observe the Sabbath. In a way, these are two halves of the commandment. The first half is to honor the day that God rested from creation, and then the second half is to keep the Sabbath prohibitions as a remembrance of the Exodus. Now, you'd be right that God doesn't expect Gentiles to observe the Sabbath, so that second half. But what about remembering the Sabbath? Rabbi Shlomo Ephraim wrote, "All nations are obligated to remember the Sabbath day in order to affix in their hearts faith in the formation of the world, which gives trustworthy testimony of the Lord regarding his existence." In other words, he suggested that, on some level, Gentiles should acknowledge the seventh day as the Sabbath, because that affirms that the God who rested on the seventh day is our Creator and our King. You don't have to accept Rabbi Ephraim's conclusion to appreciate his point. God wants all of humanity to accept his rule and abandon the false gods of the world. To remember the Sabbath is to recognize God's handiwork and affirm his sovereignty. If you choose to rest in some way on a Sabbath, I believe you will be partaking of the blessing and holiness God invested into it so long ago. Sabbath rest pre-existed the New Testament, Mount Sinai, and even Abraham. The Sabbath was in the Garden of Eden, and it still offers a sanctuary and time for those who seek peace. For believers, it is a vision and a foretaste of the Sabbath rest that remains for when Jesus returns and ushers in the age of peace. This week's episode is written and read by myself, Jordan Upton. Our producer is Jeff Reynolds, our engineers are Elliot Beckley and Jordan Evans, and our editor is Chad Walden.